are Discover the Finger Lakes, and we have another exciting episode for all of you for the month of January. And before we show you this, we're going to put in a disclaimer right now. And Discover the Finger Lakes, James Kinney and Brady Hill, has no affiliation with any political or religious organizations that might show hate and bigotry. We have no part of that. On to some good news. We have 140 likes on our Facebook page, which is great. And we thank everyone, especially my brother-in-law, the freak, Duke Clark. We welcome you to our organization. And also, we want everyone to go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe. Now, as we were saying in this episode, it's a little different. We are celebrating 3 women in history. I will start off by saying Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Harriet Tubman. And we're going to be looking at a few things that puts everything related together for this episode. So we hope you enjoy this episode. Let's start it off. Susan Brunwell Anthony, February 15, 1820 to March 13, 1906, better known as Susan B. Anthony, was an American writer, lecturer, and abolitionist who was a leading figure in the women's rights movement. Raised in a Quaker household, Anthony went on to work as a teacher. She later partnered with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and would eventually lead the National Women's Suffrage Association. Susan B. Anthony used this very stone to get into her carriage. Susan B. Anthony House in Rochester, New York, was the home of Susan B. Anthony for 40 years, while she was a national figure in the women's rights movement. The house was purchased for use as a memorial in 1945 and declared a National Historic Landmark in 1965. It has been documented in the Historic American Building Survey. The Susan B. Anthony House is located at 17 Madison Street in Rochester, New York. Access to the house is through the Susan B. Anthony Museum entrance at 19 Madison Street. In 1872, in this very room, Anthony was arrested for voting in her hometown of Rochester, New York, and convicted in a widely publicized trial. Although she refused to pay the fine, the authorities declined to take further action. In 1878, Susan and Stanton arranged for Congress to be presented with an amendment giving women the right to vote. Here is a nursery rhyme associated with this purse. Miss Lulu had a baby, she called him Tiny Tim. She put him in the bathtub so see if he could swim. He drank up all the water, he ate up all the soap, he tried to swallow the bathtub, but it wouldn't go down his throat. Call the doctor, call the nurse, for the lady with the alligator purse. Mumps, said the doctor, measles, said the nurse, vote, said the lady with the alligator purse. Once you tour Susan B. Anthony's house, you should go to the museum and look around, and there are lots of memorabilia from the time period. Something that you would probably enjoy. I certainly did, looking through all the artifacts that was here. Here is an interesting story. Buffalo Bill Cody invited Susan B. Anthony as a guest to his Wild West show, located just outside the exposition. When the show opened, he rode his horse directly to her and greeted her with a dramatic flair. According to a co-worker, Anthony, for the moment as enthusiastic as a girl, waved her handkerchief at him, while the big audience, catching the spirit of the scene, wildly applauded. At a birthday celebration in Washington, D.C., days before she died, Anthony had spoken of those who had worked with her for women's rights. She said, "There have been others also just as true and devoted to the cause. I wish I could name every one, but with such women consecrating their lives, failure is impossible." Is a park that was named after Susan B. Anthony and dedicated to her. Now, when you reach the park, there is two statues of her and Frederick Douglass having tea. We will talk about Frederick Douglass later on, but it was said that they were very good friends. Susan B. Anthony died at the age of 86 of heart failure and pneumonia in her home in Rochester, New York, on March 13, 1906. She was buried at New Hope Cemetery in Rochester, New York. The Seneca Falls Convention was the first women's rights convention in the United States, held in July 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. The meeting launched the women's suffrage movement, which more than 7 decades later ensured women the right to vote. Originally known as the Women's Rights Convention, the Seneca Falls Convention fought for the social, civil, and religious rights of women. The meeting was held from July 19th to the 20th, 1848, at the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, New York. Despite scarce publicity, 300 people, mostly area residents, showed up. On the first day, only women were allowed to attend. The second day was open to men. A courageous call for equal rights. The inscription reads on the billboard, "At first we traveled quite alone, but before we had gone many miles, we came on the other wagon load of women. And long before we reached Seneca Falls, we were a procession." Charlotte Woodward, about 1920. Led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, conventioners debated and amended the proposed Declaration of Sentiments. That evening, Lucretia Mott spoke publicly on emerging reforms movements in the United States. The Great Lighthouse. The inscription reads, "Home to progressive thinkers and welcoming to reformist speakers." The Wesleyan Chapel was known as the Great Lighthouse. Now, on this day, we came to see the museum and walk through for ourselves. Unfortunately, with the government shutdown, we were not able to go in, but we found a wealth of information and history outside the very building. Now, the 5 women organizers of this was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a leading women's rights advocate who was driving organizer of the Seneca Falls Convention; Lucretia Mott, a Quaker preacher from Philadelphia who was known for her anti-slavery, women's rights, and religious reform; Mary McClintock, the daughter of a Quaker, an anti-slavery, temperance, and women's rights activist; Martha Coffin Wright, Lucretia Mott's sister, in addition being a lifelong proponent of women's rights, and who ran a station on the Underground Railroad. Jane Hunt, another Quaker activist, was a member of McClintock's extended family through marriage. Now, there were men involved with the event. If you look to the lower right, you might recognize the gentleman, Frederick Douglass, who we've spoken about, as well as James Mott, William Dale, Thomas McClintock, George W. Pryor, Richard P. Hunt, Henry C. Moore, Ellis J. Doughty were some of the men that supported the Declaration of Sentiments. Stanton's busy world. The inscription says, "The landscape in front of you looked vastly different in Elizabeth Cady Stanton's day. Instead of a serene lake, mills, factories lined the much narrow Seneca Canal and Seneca River. Canal boats plied the waterways, trains on the Auburn and Rochester Railroad chugged along the opposite bluff. When Stanton joined her family and traveled into town on the Seneca Turnpike, they joined herds of animals, coaches, and laden wagons, all of them kicking up choking clouds of dust." Stanton's Grassmere. The inscription says, "When the Stanton family moved to Seneca Falls in 1847, the house was nearly twice as large as it is now. It is but dilapidated and overgrown. Acting as her own general contractor, Elizabeth Cady Stanton hired workers and oversaw its refurbishment. The Stantons named the house Grassmere after poet William Wordsworth's English home, a landscape that inspired in some of his poetic dreams."
Some linen, a dream you whisper in my ear, lost in your eyes, lost
Elizabeth Cady Stanton owned this property in her own name and sold it in 1862 when the Stantons moved to New York City. The house had been closed for some years and needed many repairs, and the grounds were overgrown with weeds. Stanton said, "My father gave me a check and said with a smile, 'You believe in women's capacity to do and dare. Now go ahead and put your place in order. I set carpenters, painters, paper hangers, and gardeners at work, built a new kitchen and woodhouse, and in 1 month took possession. The Lady Elizabeth Cady Stanton, 80 years and more, 1898. We accomplish wonders. In pursuit of women's rights, Elizabeth Cady Stanton developed a network that included some of the most famous reformers in American history: Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Mott and her sister Martha Wright, William Lloyd Garrison, and most prominently Susan B. Anthony, all visited here. In 1857, Stanton beckoned Anthony to Seneca Falls. "We will accomplish wonders," she promised. Anthony challenged and inspired Stanton to new efforts and new methods to do or dare anything. Stanton gave speeches, wrote for local and national newspapers, adopted the bloomer costume, and planned conventions and suffrage drives. In 1860, Stanton achieved a major victory when New York State passed a new significantly enhanced women's rights. Still, much remained to be done, and Stanton and Anthony pursued the cause relentlessly. Miss Stanton said to Susan B. Anthony, "You must come here for a week or two, and we will accomplish wonders." Susan B. said of Elizabeth, "Oh, Miss Stanton, how my soul longs to see you in the great battlefield. When will this time come? You say in 2 or 3 years. God and the angels keep you safe from all hindrances. If you come not to the rescue, who shall?" I have seen this sign through my journeys, and when me and Brady hiked the Ganagra Creek Trail, this sign was here, and it is in this area that the Underground Railroad was used. Another Underground Railroad station in Palmyra, New York that we have already discussed in a past episode.
This is the Western Presbyterian Church. This building was built in 1832. It was dedicated in 1833. The Wayne County Abolition Society, or Anti-Slave Society, was founded in there in 1834. Up by the bell tower, there was a station for Underground Railroad. Yes, and many folks went through there. And a fellow by the name of Reverend Horace Eaton was an abolitionist, and he brought the folks here. Maybe they came from Pliny Sexton's house down that way. But the only people know who was on the Underground Railroad were the people when they left, where they left from and when they went to. Nobody else could be trusted because you would get in a lot of trouble. And in 1850, when they passed the Anti-Slavery Runaway Act, which meant that if someone ran away, you could still claim them as property, which really is awful. Here, they really were pro-abolition in Palmyra. Really pro-abolition. There were two big events in Palmyra, one in 1818 and one in 1834. The one in 1834 happened right down here on Canandaigua Street. It was labeled riot and outrage. And it had to do with a young African-American girl who was brought by
There were many routes of the Underground Railroad, but I read that this highway 5 and 20 was used, or at least it was used in this area, and it was said to be a very dangerous route through middle of upstate New York and up into Canada. We've talked about Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the Women's Rights Museum. So now we're going to go to Auburn, New York to Harriet Tubman's home. Harriet Tubman was an American abolitionist and political activist born into slavery. She escaped and subsequently made some 13 missions to rescue approximately 70 enslaved people, including family and friends. The Harriet Tubman National Historic Park includes Thompson Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church that Tubman raised funds to. It also includes the Visitor Center and the Tubman Home for the Aged, and also the Harriet Tubman Residence. As a child, Harriet Tubman's mom told Bible stories. The particular variety of her early Christian belief remains unclear, but she acquired a passionate faith in God. She rejected the teachings of the New Testament that urged slaves to be obedient, but found guidance in the Old Testament tales of deliverance. Tubman was devout, and when she began experiencing visions and vivid dreams, she interpreted them as revelations from God. Over 11 years, Tubman returned to the eastern shore of Maryland, where she made her escape, and freed 70 slaves in about 13 expeditions, including her 3 other brothers, Henry, Ben, and Robert, their wives, and some of their children. She also provided specific instructions to 50 to 60 additional fugitives who escaped to the north. Tubman's dangerous work required tremendous ingenuity. She usually worked during winter months to minimize the likelihood that the group would be seen.
Over the hills and far from mine, she's waiting for love to be realized. I'll send her my heart covered as a gift, and hope that you'll take it into her side. La 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 la.
As you walk through the visitor center, you will see displays full of some of Harriet Tubman's personal items, including dishes and cups from her home. In Harriet Tubman's later years, she worked to promote the cause of women's suffrage. A white woman once asked Tubman whether she believed women ought to have the right to vote, and received the reply, "I suffered enough to believe it." Tubman began attending meetings of suffragist organizations and was soon working alongside women such as Susan B. Anthony and Emily Howland. When the Civil War began, Tubman worked for the Union Army, first as a cook and a nurse, and then as an armed scout and spy. She was the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war, which liberated 700 enslaved. In 1858, she met a man, an abolitionist named John Brown, and helped him plan and recruit supporters for the raid on Harper's Ferry. Harriet Tubman married a free black man by the name of John Tubman, although little is known about him or their time together. Tubman spent her remaining years in Auburn, New York, tending to her family and other people in need. She worked various jobs to support her elderly parents and took in boarders to help pay the bills. By 1911, her body was so frail that she had to be admitted into the rest home named in her honor. In 1913, Tubman died of pneumonia, but just before she died, she told those in the room, "I go to prepare a place for you." Tubman was buried with semi-military honors at Fort Hill Cemetery in Auburn, New York. Harriet Tubman, widely known and well respected while she was alive, became an American icon in the years after she died. A survey at the end of the 20th century named her as one of the most famous civilians in American history before the Civil War, third only to Betsy Ross and Paul Revere. She inspired generations of African Americans struggling for equality and civil rights. She was praised by leaders across the political spectrum. At the turn of the 20th century, Tubman became heavily involved with the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Auburn. In 1903, she donated a parcel of real estate she owned to the church, under the instructions that it be made into a home for the aged and indigent colored people. Harriet Tubman was recognized as the Moses of her people. The Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged is the house where she fulfilled her dream of opening a home for indigent and elderly African Americans. In 1911, she was admitted there herself and remained there until her death until 1913. The Harriet Tubman residence was Tubman's home, during which much of her time she lived in Auburn from 1859 through 1913. The land was sold to her in 1859 by then Senator William H. Seward.
Well, thanks for watching this episode on Discover the Finger Lakes, and we hope you enjoyed it, because see, there's a lot about history, and that's what we do here. We're not one-sided, that's for sure. So just want to let everybody know to go to our YouTube channel and watch our episode, like, subscribe. And once again, I can speak for Brady. Thank you for being our subscribers and our viewers and watching everything that we do. And so now, I'm actually out here getting ready to film more of the Crescent Trail in the snow. And so, I just want to say, get out, enjoy yourselves, and hike and bike if you can. Also, our Facebook page is available. You can go on there and like what we do on there and follow everything we do. So for Brady Hill, this is James Kinney. Thanks for watching Season 2, Episode 8. Thank you.
Before you, I was so used to silence, like a heavy stone sitting on my chest. I was so numb, couldn't feel
Next time on Discover the Finger Lakes, we take you to the Geneva Historical Society in Geneva, New York, and hike a couple trails, perhaps maybe see some more snow.